Sybil Stockdale was a Navy officer's wife, trained not to rock the boat. Then her husband, a fighter pilot, was shot down over North Vietnam in September 1965. The boat got rocked. We have a special episode this week. We are hopping right into the drama of this amazing Navy spouse, and it will be followed by an exclusive interview with another amazing Navy spouse who is organizing and hustling to make the lives and experience of MILSOs better with advice, community support, and clear, concise,
pithy, one might say,
guides for duty stations and the surrounding areas.
And MILSOs are military spouses for those of you who are not in the know. And by that, I mean
everybody else.
Everybody else who doesn't have the military telling you what to do with your life at every moment of every day. Yay!
That's so true.
Yeah.
Home is where the Navy sends us.
So they say.
So they say. For today, I will be indulging in one of my grandmother's most favorite pastimes ever. Reading obituaries.
Seriously?
Yeah, seriously.
You go, Granny!
When I was young, my granny kept me and babysat me. She would always read the obituaries to see if she knew anyone who had died and would mark off who she beat by staying alive longer than they did.
You know, it's the little things in life, isn't it?
I think you have to be over 70 to appreciate her logic, but nevertheless, today many of our sources are Sybil's obituaries from across the nation. San Diego, San Francisco, Washington, D.C., New York, Chicago, and the list goes on. This woman was such a force of nature that when she died, the nation mourned.
That's the goal, right? For the whole nation to mourn one's passing. Also, it helps that the Navy makes you live many different places. You get obituaries in every major city. Yay!
Exactly.
You make relationships in every city that you live in, and she made an impact in all of those places.
And one can only hope to be so impactful.
I do.
Yeah. Please. Additionally, we are using the book she co-authored with her husband, James Bond Stockdale, in Love and War, as well as The League of Wives, written by Heath Hardage Lee. As always, you can find a complete list of sources, photos, and bullet point facts in our show notes at thepithychronicle.com. Think of it as a little cheat sheet so you can be the most well-read person at your next dinner party or meeting of the intellectual minds at the playground.
Also, just some extra housekeeping, although I do love the intellectual playground meetup. That sounds fantastic. Instead of having the salon in Paris, we're having the playground meetings.
Let's be honest, that's where you've got to do it so you can let the kids run.
It's true! Let Mommy play with her friends.
Mm-hmm.
Mommy has friends too. So some additional housekeeping before we get too far. We really want to thank our patrons on Patreon. We are so grateful for your support. And if you would like to support our podcast, you can go to patreon.com/The Pithy Chronicle and give us a little
boost for our struggle bus.
A little love. It really helps us to bring you the best sources we can find. It allows us to have subscriptions to make our sound quality even better. And, of course, we are offering extras for our patrons, like Knowledge Nuggets. Our Bridgerton review, which is coming out this week. And we had so much to say.
Oh, so much.
So much. And other little small bites of related information that just didn't make it into the full episodes. To support in another way, leaving a review or giving us a rating of preferably 5 stars. If you want to give 2, don't leave a rating.
If you want to give 2, explain in the reviews, because I want to know, how can I get better?
That's fair. Let's try it this way. If you were going to give 2, send us a message to tell us why before the review and see if we can fix it. we respond very quickly.
Very quickly.
Because we have children and we're up at all hours of the night.
Mm-hmm. And we're covering 2 time zones.
Okay. Thank you so much. And
without further ado, let's meet the woman of the hour. Born Sybil Elizabeth Bailey, she grew up in East Haven, Connecticut, where her father and uncle operated a dairy. She graduated from Mount Holyoke College and was teaching at a private girls' school in Richmond, Virginia, when she met her future husband, a midshipman at the Naval Academy, on a blind date in 1946. They were married a year later.
Erica, didn't you also meet your husband on a blind date?
It's lucky, I think.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Is it? There you go.
It did definitely endear me to the couple to begin with. Not that I hadn't heard all of the legendary oohs and ahs over the Stockdales, but it definitely set them up for super success. Life as a Navy wife meant a lot of moves over the years. More than 30 in all. She's got me beat. How many do you have?
I'm at 8. 8.
Wow.
What have you got?
I think 5.
Okay. So combined, we're still not even half.
But that was including one in 1957 to Palo Alto, where she got her master's degree in education at Stanford.
Just a little university you might have heard of.
Maybe. And they settled full-time in Coronado, which is, again, living the dream.
My dad actually grew up on a naval base in Coronado.
Oh, nice. The dream.
Yeah.
Anyway, the Stockdales were blessed with 4 children: Taylor, Sid, Stanford, and Jim. Sybil seemed pretty busy doing the whole military wife, mom, teacher gig.
Yeah, I think we can slightly relate to that little juggle.
Yeah. When her husband, James, was shot down in Vietnam, which, obviously throws a kink in her day-to-day activities.
I think that is the understatement of the year, Erica. A kink?
Yeah, a kink.
A kink.
I mean, it would definitely throw off my day.
I would definitely cancel plans for the rest of the day, yeah.
And someone get me a babysitter. Because I gotta go cry in my bathroom for the rest of the day. Anyway, this is how she describes feeling when she got the news, and this is a quote from In Love and War. Caroline, would you do the honors?
Quote, soon after hearing the news of Jem's disappearance, the phone started to ring with official Navy messages and friends offering sympathy and support. I still felt only a numb, sleepwalking sensation. The frightening possibility that the news media might descend upon me at any time was an overriding concern in my mind. I felt somewhat reassured by remembering that in the briefing about guidelines, if your husband was taken prisoner, the commander had said our government believed the men being held were well treated. If I kept quiet, the Navy felt the communists would continue to treat the men in a humane and civilized way. I felt sure the government had a good reason to insist on this keep quiet policy. I have never heard of the keep quiet policy.
Not even a little.
And I do know that the prisoners were not treated humanely.
Yeah,
I have actually been to Vietnam to see some of the prison camps, and no. So I find that very scary. And also the fact that one of her main concerns was news media. It never would have occurred to me that would be something that she would have to deal with after having such a private, devastating moment.
What are they expecting?
It makes me think of the first astronauts' wives, which would actually be a very good episode to do as well. When their husbands would go up on the first orbital voyages, they had TV crews stationed outside their house. So live or die, they were going to be on national TV, and their children are there. They were waiting for the drama, which is really painful to think about.
Yeah, that's crappy.
Mm-hmm. It's crappy.
On a very baseline metric, crappy.
Being in the spotlight is just not pleasant, I don't think.
For my husband being a prisoner of war.
Mm-hmm.
So, Mrs. Stockdale was taught by intelligence officers how to share secret messages with her husband. Some hidden behind photos that peeled away when soaked in liquid, others written on invisible carbon paper so that information could be passed back and forth.
That is so cool.
Yeah.
I have not gotten this kind of training. I'd like to know if anyone else has.
Yeah.
And is this after he was a prisoner of war? Someone taught her how to do this?
Yes.
Fascinating.
Mm-hmm. She even cites in Love and War that she knew something was up with, as she affectionately calls him, Jim. because she could tell by the letters she was getting home, his handwriting had been so misshapen. Something had to have happened to him.
Oh, no.
To his hand, yeah.
Oh, gosh. So obviously not so humane based on this information.
Shocking, I know.
Can't believe that they wouldn't have been treated well.
To be fair, it's not like media was putting any of this out.
No.
There was that keep quiet policy.
Yeah, I can't see that.
It's
because
not
the
like
war
Vietnam was exactly popular.
The soldiers that were going over there while they were fighting and dying for their country weren't always celebrated back home because people back home didn't want the war. And so even though the soldiers didn't say, I want to go to war, they still weren't being supported. That's tough.
So obviously, our girl does not take this sitting down, despite all of the feelings about the news media, etc. She decides that she must act. In her own words, as that summer of 1968 progressed, I felt overwhelmed by an avalanche of trouble. I received a letter from writer Felix Green, who had recently returned from Hanoi. So James was a prisoner of war at Hanoi, which was later dubbed the Hanoi Hilton.
Oh!
Yeah, exactly.
I feel that that's a misnomer.
Yeah. Quote from Felix Green. I'm very surprised that your husband has indicated that he is in solitary confinement. I wonder, in fact, if you are correct in assuming this. From what I have seen, and from what most other reporters from Europe have observed, the usual practice is to allow a number of U.S. prisoners to be housed together. For what comfort it might be to you, I might say that those of us who have been able to see prisoners in North Vietnam have concluded that their treatment has been good, unquote.
Was this an unsolicited letter from said Felix Green? He just wrote her out of the blue and was like, girl, he's not in confinement. I know better. I've been there. It's
like the one person on Facebook who unsolicitedly posts a comment.
Offers advice?
Yep, and is like, actually...
That sounds right.
Yep.
I see your feelings, but I'm here to tell you why you're wrong for the following 17 reasons, because I am the expert.
And it's like, are you really? I've looked at your LinkedIn.
I did a deep dive.
Because I always do. If you're ever wondering, I do look at your LinkedIn.
And now you know.
Anyway, as he, Felix, and others broadcast this sort of misinformation, again, understatement.
Misinformation.
I felt more and more inclined to tell the truth publicly. As you should, Sybil.
Yay, Sybil.
All my reading about communist treatment of prisoners throughout the world led me to believe that telling the truth about Hanoi's treatment of American prisoners might be our only hope.
I am not pleased by this whole Felix Green situation. I feel like he is a busybody who stuck his nose in where it did not belong, and he's spreading misinformation that is keeping those servicemen in such terrible, inhumane situations. So, I think we should curse him.
Can we give him bed bugs? I feel like that's the appropriate. Bed bugs, they can never get away.
Scabies. Worse. Yes.
My sentiments, exactly.
So, wait. I really want to know more about this whole sit down and shut up policy, because I don't understand why it was there if everyone knew it wasn't helping.
Are you sure?
I thought I was sure. I'm pretty sure.
Okay. It's not great. This excerpt is from No Direction Home, and it's entitled Mothers in a Fatherless World.
Damn, that is dark. Oh, God. Okay, I'm ready, I think.
Although U.S. personnel were captured and taken prisoner of war in Southeast Asia as early as 1961, the dramatic story of POWs and their families did not receive public attention until 1966.
That's a 5-year difference.
It's a long time to be in captivity.
5 years. Continue.
Prior to that time, the government pursued what it called a policy of quiet diplomacy, later dubbed the Keep Quiet policy by one disillusioned POW wife. Wonder who that could be.
Who could it have been?
Premised on the assumption that publicizing information about POWs might jeopardize their safety and derail ongoing negotiations with the North Vietnamese. This policy advised the families of captured and missing men to stay out of the public eye, refrain from contacting the press, and keep their private concerns about their men, precisely that, private.
I'm guessing that the military, knowing this was such an unpopular war, didn't want it highly publicized, that men were not only dying, but were being taken prisoner for a long time, and then not being treated well at all. And from what I saw when I was in Vietnam of how those prisoners were treated, it was gut-wrenching to think about. So I'm thinking that's why they had this keep quiet policy. I feel that it likely had very little to do with diplomacy. And I think that the intelligent and outspoken spouse who redubbed it the keep quiet policy from quiet diplomacy was perhaps just being like, let's call a spade a spade.
Yeah, be honest about what it is.
F you people, get my husband home.
Yep, yeah. Beginning in 1966, a number of international and domestic forces converged to undermine this policy. Thank goodness. As the government began to receive reports of prisoner treatment, the Johnson administration became more proactive on the POW issue, establishing a Committee on Prisoner Matters within the State Department in April of 1966.
5 years later, they decided to get a committee. I love when they get a committee. Woo. Yay, a committee! It's gonna do so much.
Hip hip hooray. I love a committee. So around the same time, both the CIA and the Defense Intelligence Agency, so CIA and DIA, became heavily involved in POW information gathering. 2 months later, the matter assumed greater public urgency when the North Vietnamese, in a misguided attempt to garner international sympathy, released film footage showing manacled American prisoners being marched at gunpoint through the streets of Hanoi, surrounded by hostile crowds.
Oh gosh.
Less than a year later, in 1967, Life magazine featured a full-page photograph of captured naval officer Richard Stratton at a Hanoi press conference, apparently bowing in submission. According to one sympathetic POW chronicler, it was an arresting image of a big husky pilot now looking like an automaton, like someone who had been made into a puppet. A haunting reminder of the speculations about brainwashing and collaboration that had surrounded the experience of Korean War POWs. Stratton's Pavlovian performance alarmed his family, government officials, and the American public.
Holy cow.
However disturbing these images, the Go Public campaign did not take off in earnest until late 1968.
We're at 7 years. Okay.
When the mounting demands of POW families converged with the political interests, let's be fair, of Richard Nixon's presidential campaign.
Oh my goodness. Oh no, these families have been complaining for so long, but now that I want to be elected president, I'll throw Johnson under the bus, and I will bring this terrible, inhumane treatment to the forefront 7 years later. With a committee.
With a committee.
Gotta love a committee.
By the late 1960s, many relatives of POWs had grown angry and frustrated not only by the dearth of information coming out of Vietnam, but also by the policy of quiet diplomacy, which they had come to see as an excuse for government inaction. Our girl Sybil Stockdale had met on numerous occasions with officials in the Naval and State Departments and had come to the disheartening conclusion that, quote, official silence and secrecy can cover up the incompetence and just plain inertia, unquote.
You know, this woman, she doesn't hold a punch. And I love that about her. And you know what? If my husband was in a POW camp, I would be throwing punches left and right. I'm literally taking a kickboxing class right now. I'm ready.
Good for you.
Thank you. I'm ready. But I appreciate that she, as we said, is just calling them on their BS. She is refusing to accept it because if you are in the military life, it definitely is sort of a thing where you're supposed to follow the company line. You're supposed to just drink the Kool-Aid.
You also definitely understand that institutional inertia.
Yes, you do. Yes.
Yes.
In so many ways.
Because it just goes, man. It just goes. It's a machine. It's a whole machine.
And this sounds terrible, but you do have to fight for yourself. Like when you move, what works best for your family is not going to work best for the Navy or the Army or the Air Force or the Marines or the Coast Guard. I want to get them all in. But you have to advocate for yourself, or the service member has to advocate for their family. No one else is going to do it for you. They don't care. So Sybil, I mean, her situation is so much
Yes.
worse.
And one person in the cog of the great machine is like...
it's just a little fly.
You can see where it gets lost in that institutional inertia. But again, that's a move, not a prisoner of war. There's no, like, excuse for that.
We are aware there's a difference. I'm just saying not a lot has changed in some respects.
Yeah, just very, very small tie-in. But anyway, on October 27, 1968, she defied the government's policy. This is like 6 months after her husband is taken. Good for you. Don't wait on them.
Mm-mm.
She defied the government's policy and went public with her husband's story in the San Diego Union Tribune. Not acting alone, she was part of an informal network of POW wives, parents, siblings who were taking matters into their own hands. They launched multiple letter-writing campaigns to members of Congress and the White House, appealed to the press, attempted to establish direct contact with Hanoi in the hope of gathering information, and sent POW wives to Washington, D.C. and to the Paris peace talks to demand North Vietnamese compliance with the terms of the Geneva Convention.
Yes.
Chills!
Yes.
Chills!
These women are...
kicking ass and taking names.
They are not letting this stand, and it is so impressive.
Yeah.
And I know that we have a lot of soapboxes on this show, and that women in general have a lot of soapboxes they're standing on right now for one reason or another. But this one is perhaps one of the most chilling because humanity is at stake in some ways. This notion of holding a government accountable to its people that it has sent overseas to fight for them and saying, you must take care of them. Chills.
Exactly. To make this even better, in 1970, the informal network of family lobbyists became the National League of Families of American Prisoners and Missing in Southeast Asia, and it is still in operation today.
What? Why is it still in operation today?
Well... So it's kind of sad. No, it is sad. There's no kind of about it. 1,584 Americans are still listed by the DoD as missing and unaccounted for from the Vietnam War. 1,244 of those from Vietnam, 285 unaccounted for from Laos, 48 from Cambodia, and People's Republic of China territorial waters is 7. These numbers do fluctuate due to investigations, and the League seeks the fullest possible account for those still missing and repatriation of all recoverable remains. The highest priority is accounting for Americans last known alive. U.S. intelligence indicates some Americans known to be in captivity in Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia were not returned at the end of the war. What?
Yeah. I'm assuming that means they died and that the Vietnamese weren't acknowledging their death. That's how I'm reading this. Because,
I hate to say it. I hope that's how it is.
Oh,
because
that would be far better than still being a captive. I highly doubt that. Or
yeah.
I think a lot of it is that they didn't want to acknowledge deaths that were due to inhumane treatment, and it was far easier just to not say anything. I actually met a friend of a friend who was in the Army, and he was sent TAD, temporary assigned duty, to go and literally look for these bodies.
My God.
I think he was in Cambodia, or maybe Vietnam, I can't say for sure, but he was somewhere in that area, and he was there for a period of, I believe, 3 months with a whole other team sent in support of this mission, finding the lost bodies of American soldiers and sailors. It was interesting to hear from him about the experience. It's a very noble thing to be doing. It doesn't feel action-packed like his other deployments to the Middle East, which he also did. But at the same time, if you could just give one family closure, it is something that the government still does do. So while perhaps in the 60s and 70s they were not taking their responsibility seriously, I do love that they still have this league that is continuing to search for the missing, for the lost. The government is supplying, in small numbers, servicemen and women to go over there and try to recover what we can. It's hard, physical work. Oh, and you're going around landmines. P.S.
Just casually.
Yeah, casually watch out for that landmine.
In the absence of evidence to the contrary, it must be assumed that these Americans could still be alive, and the U.S. government should not rule out the possibility and seek to account for them as a matter of highest national priority.
You have to care for your own that gave their life for you. You just have to. And Sybil Stockdale made sure that the government was getting its flippin' ducks in a row and doing what they were supposed to do.
Exactly. I'm sorry to put you through this history lesson on Vietnam, but here we are.
It's an important one because clearly it's not history. It's evolving. It's still a present day problem and a
Well, and I think that's what we both like about history is that it's never quite concrete. There's always a mystery to solve, interpretation. There's always something new.
Pardon us.
Yeah, we're waxing lyric over here.
We are.
By 1969, the Nixon administration had its own reasons for wanting to publicize the POW issue. With opposition to the war growing, the new president recognized that Hanoi's refusal to disclose information about missing and captive men would prove to be a public relations boon. One that could deflect any attention away from disturbing reports coming out of Vietnam about the My Lai massacre, the indiscriminate killing of Vietnamese civilians, the free fire zones, napalm, and defoliation. Yeah, it was only within this context of widening scrutiny of American war conduct that the interests of POW families, the Nixon White House, and Congress converged, however provisionally, in May of 1969. Defense Secretary Melvin Laird ended the policy of quiet diplomacy, publicly charging Hanoi with prisoner mistreatment and demanding that if the Vietnamese did not release the prisoners, they at least had a humanitarian obligation to disclose vital information about their conditions.
Whew. At the very least.
It's like an open secret.
We see that in warfare even today. You know, it's very interesting to be talking about war with a land war going on in Europe right now. And President Biden has outright accused Putin of war crimes because of the way that they're treating the civilians. It never ends.
Wars are fought, obviously, on the ground, but wars are also fought intellectually.
Wars are fought through media.
Mm-hmm.
Think about how different Ukraine is handling this to even 10 years ago when Putin tried this again and did manage to take a small section of Crimea. It is a very different world. People are not allowed by the media to just forget. It is in their face. Mm-hmm. It is so visual, pushed into their consciousness, and it requires a response. And I think that that is something that Sybil Stockdale clearly understood. You're not thinking about it. Oh, but wait, here's his picture. Here are his children.
Yeah.
Here is his wife. Let me tell you about his treatment. What do you think about being kept in a cage that you can't stand or sit in and manacled and held at gunpoint? Oh, you wouldn't like that for your family member? Gee, I wonder.
Shock.
So, no, I think we definitely see.
And I wonder how many times she had to hear, well, this is what you signed up for.
No.
Absolutely no, it is not.
No one signs up for this.
Stop saying that. The Pithy Chronicle tells you, stop telling military families this is what you signed up for. That is our statement.
Yes. I don't recall signing on the dotted line that it was fine for my husband to be treated like that. No. Missed it somehow.
It is not compassionate. It is not kind. It is not caring. It is not empathetic, sympathetic, or any pathetic you've got. So
you don't need to be empathetic, but don't be rude. Just say, oh, hi. That's it. You don't have to comment.
Yeah.
Whew. We found a new soapbox today.
Hey, you know what? There are no sides in this one.
Well, except maybe genocide.
Genocide. Never mind.
It was definitely happening in Cambodia at the very least.
Yes, at the very least.
And I do mean the very least.
But anyway, the explicit aim of the Go Public campaign was to bring international pressure to bear on the North Vietnamese by calling attention to Hanoi's refusal to comply with the Geneva Convention's rules for prisoners of war. When viewed historically, it is clear that the campaign did advance the vision of American victimization that would shape the discourse for years to come. Ultimately, the claim that through defying the Geneva Convention, Hanoi had extended its reach into the most intimate sphere of the family, recasting the United States as a psychological casualty rather than the military aggressor.
That's an interesting take on it. I definitely see that from the familial standpoint. By taking prisoners and then treating them in such a way and then lying about it or covering it up. it definitely does have a psychological impact on the families back home, as well as, obviously, the service member themselves. But any type of warfare is psychologically damaging to the people back home.
That's true. It leaves an imprint on a generation.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, let's get back to Sybil, because she's about to whoop the entire U.S. government into
shape.
This quote from In Love and War is in reference to the League of Wives. At first, the group heeded the government's request not to say anything about the POWs, lest their words undermine ongoing negotiations about the war.
They kept their little white gloves on.
But quietly, Mrs. Stockdale
seethed.
I love it. Love it. You know that feeling. She couldn't understand why officials listed her husband as missing when she'd received prison letters from him. And it was clear from those letters and from the language he used and his penmanship that he was being mistreated. So finally, in October of 68, she went public in that interview. Quote, "The North Vietnamese have shown the only thing they care about is world opinion," unquote. Yeah.
World opinion. That's an interesting way to put it. Okay.
It's an interesting way to put it, and it's interesting that it's still a relevant situation in warfare.
Public perception is everything. I can see that North Vietnam did not want the world to see what they were doing.
Other media did pick up the story.
Good.
Other wives began speaking out, and by the time Nixon took office, thousands telegrams on his desk urging him to do something about the POWs.
Yes.
That letter writing campaign.
Fix your...
Mm-hmm.
Pardon my French, or my Vietnamese.
Yeah, you're Vietnamese.
Well, they do speak a lot of French there. That's a whole other colonial situation, but it does fit in nicely. You're welcome.
Whole other.
It's true.
Quote, "It was not a well-known issue until Sybil Stockdale and the other wives made it an issue. They realized that if they didn't make it an issue, the government was going to forget about their husbands," unquote. Can you imagine?
No, I don't understand how a government can just forget about the people that are wallowing in hell.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'm calm. Ooh.
She goes on to say, quote, "Karen Butler, another wife from the San Diego POW group, telephoned to say a West Coast editor of Look magazine would see us in Los Angeles Friday. She and I flew to Los Angeles that morning and spent more than an hour pleading with him to publish a story about our husbands. He said he'd tell the New York editor, but doubted they'd be interested."
What?
Yeah.
How could someone not be interested?
Just wait, Caroline, just wait.
I don't understand. Why were they not interested? Oh my God. Okay.
Sitting there in that plush office looking out over Los Angeles, I thought to myself, I'm crazy to try to tell the world the truth about all this. These people don't care, and I'm never going to be able to get through to them.
To feel so alone.
Yeah. And so small. Just begging someone to care.
So painful.
As we got up to leave, we asked him to contact our League of Wives secretary if he had a change of heart. "You have an organization?" he asked, suddenly perking up.
What?
We answered his many questions about the League, pleased to have him interested in some way. "We might be interested in doing an article about your little organization," he said in our farewell.
I'm sorry, your little organization? That is so misogynistic. Oh, you little wives with your little gloves and your little husbands that are sitting in little jails.
Mm-hmm. So on our way home, Karen and I reviewed our visit. "You know, Karen," I said, "his only interest was in our organization. What we need is a national organization to attract national publicity. We already have a national group with people all over the country writing to editorial writers, sending telegrams to the North Vietnamese. Why don't we call ourselves the National League of Families of American Prisoners in Southeast Asia? I'll offer to be national coordinator, and I'll call some of the others to get their okay. We could get a post office box and have stationery printed, and we'd be in business. Maybe the fact that we have a countrywide national organization would help get more publicity for our men," unquote.
If the mountain won't come to Muhammad, Muhammad will make a league that the mountain gives a shit about.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous that this was what it took, but she saw the writing on the wall and she was like, for the sake of my husband, I will work with these morons to make it palatable to them.
What a distinctly American thing, though. Let's organize to have these things matter. And also, what an amazingly female idea that says, all right, you don't want this? I'm going to arrange this so you can't say no to me. You can't say no to something that's a legal entity that's got a P.O. box, and especially back in that day, you had that matching stationery.
You just have to become official to matter.
Back to Sybil. She says, during the spring, while organizing our efforts to contact editorial writers, I talked to a few wives in other parts of the country who had started local groups. But when I got home from Los Angeles, I called several others: Louise Mulligan in Virginia Beach, Bonnie Singleton in Texas, Emma Hagerman in Washington State, Jill Lockhart in Louisiana. I'd never met them, but we shared the same goal.
A bond that no one else could understand.
Yeah, and they all agreed it might be helpful to give our national effort a name. And by July, we were going strong with 350 on our mailing list, 24 area coordinators all over the country. Never was a national organization launched more efficiently. Heck yes.
That's amazing. First of all, because women did it. Second of all, it's military spouses. And if we know anything, it's how to get shit done.
Yeah.
But what I find so sensational about this is that it wasn't that many people, but they made themselves strong by uniting and making sure that they could not be ignored. And it is exactly how milspouses work today. It is a huge network that is usually supportive. Most of us are highly educated and willing to make something out of, frankly, less than nothing. But on the darker side, we often get overlooked. We are cast as dependents, as spouses, which means that we are dependent upon our military member for our health care and their salary. But the problem is, I'm not dependent on my husband. I'm an independent woman, I think. So having this word of dependent is already derogatory.
I would agree.
And it is lessening what a military spouse brings to a marriage or a partnership. And I think that that is something the military still views very differently from the modern interpretation of marriage. My grandmother used to say that if the military wanted you to have a spouse, they would issue it with your sea bag. And I think that is very true. It is much easier if you don't have a spouse. But military spouses, when their backs are up against a wall, they know how to get things done, and clearly in this case can come running and get something fixed, established, created. We can even guilt the government into foreign policy changes. But while the big Navy might view military spouses as less, the service members themselves obviously know what their spouse gives them.
Yeah, and Stockdale, his leadership in the Pinoy Hilton, creating secret ways to communicate, establishing a code of conduct among the prisoners, smashing his face and cutting his scalp to prevent his captors from using him in a propaganda film.
Oh my God.
Rallied the other prisoners, many of whom credited him with saving their lives. After the war, he was awarded the Medal of Honor. But do you know what his response to that was, Caroline?
I do not.
He always said his wife was the courageous one.
See, while the big Navy might say that a mil spouse is a dependent, I think most partners, most service members understand that the mil spouse goes through a lot. And I don't know that I would ever say that what she did was more courageous than being a prisoner of war and hurting oneself to get out of propaganda films and saving the lives of fellow service members.
Agreed.
But at the same time, the fact that he acknowledges her contribution, and in this case, it was a huge one because she, saved him. But acknowledging that is something that is often forgotten, and it's wonderful that someone of his stature, his importance, and his rank is saying it so clearly. Not only in quotes, but he wrote a book about it. He is to the roof.
It's a made-for-TV movie, too. Just a side note.
Ooh, small bite opportunity.
Yeah.
I'm impressed and I'm touched that he would make sure that her contributions were not forgotten or swept under the rug, because they did make the government look not so good. Oh, but okay, I said something about policy changes and then we got sidetracked. Can you get us back on track? And I'm sorry for my soapboxing.
Do not apologize.
You're right. I am not sorry for my soapboxing, but at the same time, let's get back to policy changes.
But I'll let you do the honors.
Ooh, I love doing things. In Sybil's own words, quote, "Toward the end of July 1969, I, along with several other wives and parents of MIAs and POWs, was invited to attend a meeting in Secretary of Defense Melvin Laird's office in Washington, D.C. As I sat there in the Secretary's handsomely decorated, spacious dining room, I felt we were beginning to make some progress. This was the first time I'd heard any talk about specific plans for the end of the war. There had been no indication in the press that the end was anywhere near, but the Secretary of Defense certainly knew far more than the rest of us, and it was good to hear the detailed plans were on the drawing board. I had to conclude that this Vietnamization, which is a word I've never heard before, that I was hearing about for the first time was President Nixon's secret plan to end the war. I thought it was a pretty weak plan myself.
Of course she did.
Of course she did. She's like, I could fix this, but whatever. But I couldn't help liking Secretary Laird. He'd ended the keep quiet policy and had the guts to talk about the truth of the prisoners' treatment in public. I secretly felt that the organizational efforts of us wives and family on a national level had been influential in forcing our government to join us in speaking out publicly. One official in the Defense Department told me they knew they'd better join us or we were going to mop up the floor with them. And that was exactly how I wanted them to feel.
Hot diggity damn.
Hot diggity damn. I've never said that combination of words and I'm loving it.
You should say it every day.
I have chills. You have been true to your word. You promised that this would be an uplifting episode, and while the prisoner of war thing did sort of lead you down a bad track, you are not Debbie Downer this week. Bravo.
And it gets better.
Ooh, excellent.
Listen to this.
I'm ready.
In February 1973, after the United States agreed to a ceasefire, James Stockdale and almost 600 other POWs came home.
Yay! I'm going to add a sound effect. I don't know what it'll be. It'll be great.
When his plane landed at Miramar Naval Air Station, he knew that his wife would be waiting on the tarmac. His vision and hearing were damaged. He had a limp, and he couldn't raise one of his arms. But he told himself, quote, "Stand up straight now. You've got to make her proud."
Oh my God. Oh my God. I am seriously crying. I think this truly might be our first happy ending, which is so lovely because history often doesn't end that way, at least the notable things.
Yeah.
So thank you for giving us something happy to hang our hat on.
And I'm happy to tell you we can close out the episode. Sybil and her husband continued to advocate for MIA POWs for the rest of their lives. And we know, although some of our listeners may not, there was a destroyer commissioned in their honor, the USS Stockdale, and he went on to serve as president of the Citadel and run for vice president. Sybil Stockdale is the recipient of the Navy Distinguished Public Service Award, the highest award given by the Department of the Navy to a citizen not employed by the department.
And damn did she earn it.
Yeah, she is the only wife of an active duty officer to ever have been so honored. And she also received the Ombudsman of the Year award.
The ombudsman, for those who don't know, is someone who is a go-between with the ship or the squadron or the military leadership and the families back home, especially when they're deployed.
And what a liaison she was.
What a liaison. Usually they're very important, but they're like, they'll be getting home this day, but be sure to keep that on the DL. Loose lips sink ships, that kind of stuff. Ours is really good about telling us about events that are going on around town. This is above and beyond. Mm-hmm. Definitely the Ombudsman of the Year.
And that, my friends, is that.
We hope that you have enjoyed this week's episode. Thank you, Erica, for finding something that was so close to home for us personally, and that also resonates as such a wonderful, happy ending for our listeners that are non-military, because I'm sure they needed a breather.
Absolutely.
And please do tune in to our fantastic interview with The Submerged Life, which is an organization that goes to support military spouses and their entrepreneurship and the life that we lead, because it is slightly unique. If you have a moment, you can certainly go over to The Submerged Life on Facebook or Instagram. They have great content, and we really appreciate that they reached out and wanted to collaborate and feature us as military spouse entrepreneurs. So thank you.
With that, I'm Erica.
And I'm Caroline, and we are Pithily Yours. Please stay tuned for a short preview of our interview with Megan from The Submerged Life, where we talk about what it's like to be a military spouse, give a few insights into running a business, and also just have a laugh at our own expense.
Hi, this is Megan from The Submerged Life. I have had the pleasure to sit down with the lovely Erica and Caroline, the producers of the podcast, The Pithy Chronicle. I think that the Submerged Life audience will love their historical tales.
With a little bit of bite.
And a lot of sarcasm.
We serve it up on a platter.
We get all the dirty, dark details that you're dying to know.
Oh, I love it. Tell us a little bit about your podcast.
The Pithy Chronicle is a podcast that is released weekly. We want to prove that history is far more than just dates and treaties. It's crazy people doing crazy things. We want to highlight the crazy and make you laugh, make you cry, let you know that history continues to repeat itself. And as we see in this world today, people are still doing crazy things. Putin. Did I say that out loud? Oops, my bad.
My bad. Whatever. Okay, I see you. History can be so convoluted, we try to make sure we are really putting them to the test.
Feet to the flames.
Oh, absolutely.
How do you two manage work-life balance as a military spouse?
Oh, last night my husband told me that I was working on a Sunday night when he thought we were supposed to be Netflixing and chilling.
Did all of the chilling okay?
Okay, stop it. Stop it. So spicy.
It doesn't sound like anything spicy.
But I think me having something that gives me purpose and challenges me helps with the work-life balance, because otherwise your life revolves around your spouse's work. And that is stressful because you have zero control over it, and it's unfulfilling.
Oh, that's so true. My biggest trick for everything in my life is expectation management.
When starting a business, expect it will take a lot more effort than you think.
We do so much for our spouse, our kids, our dogs, our community. It is okay, and sometimes you need somebody to give you the blessing and say, it's okay to have time to yourself. Even if it's slow, you will come out better and more refreshed and able to give back all of those wonderful things that you already give to your community and give it from a full cup rather than an empty cup. I love the old proverb, you can't pour from an empty cup. I mean, I maybe abuse it a little bit because I'm like, I can't pour from an empty cup. I need a manicure. But it is at the essence very true.
I really love that. And I love the fact that you intertwine the military life in your podcast.
There is a lot of military within our podcast and history because you have to win wars somehow. So we do. But also we do try to highlight some mil spouses. We've got Sybil Stockdale coming up.
Love it. So often in the history books, the military spouses are overshadowed.
There's history everywhere you want to find it. If you're interested in something, you just have to look.
History anywhere you want to find it.
Y'all heard them, the Pithy Chronicle.
Anywhere you find your podcasts, you'll find us.
You are in luck. We're there.
And we are pithily yours.
This episode is brought to you by the Pithy Chronicle, LLC. The Pithy Chronicle is intended for education, entertainment, and non-commercial purposes. Any views or opinions expressed in this podcast are personal and do not represent those of people, institutions, or organizations that the owner may or may not be associated with in a professional or personal capacity. While we offer lots of sarcasm, this podcast does not offer any advice or services. Listening to this podcast may induce fits of laughter, unexpected distraction, or uncontrollable rage at the subjects, hopefully not at us. We hope you learned something today. If not, so sorry. Please be advised we are not experts in the following fields: medical, legal, financial, technological, thermonuclear engineering, submarine warfare, neuroscience, or cat husbandry. Thanks for listening to our little disclaimer. Just covering our history-loving asses. Bye!